Hi all, Rick here with part 1 of a lore breakdown of the Star Trek timeline from the year 2379 to the Romulan supernova that destroyed many systems in Romulan space, including their adopted homeworlds of Romulus and Remus. So, I finally got my mitts on a copy of Star Trek Picard, The Last Best Hope by Una McCormack, and reading through the prequel to Picard, set in the expansive gap of time between Star Trek Nemesis and the Romulan supernova, this book adds a lot to the timeline moving forwards and sets up a far more familiar Starfleet in a universe yet unsundered by the cataclysmic event. This video series contains information and spoilers from the aforementioned book, Star Trek Picard, and the Picard Countdown series. For the purpose of keeping this video on topic, I'll just quickly add that the book continually refers to the exploding star as simply the Romulan star, and it never specifies which system it was in, just that Romulus was in danger. It does allude to both it being the Romulan sun and also not. In other sources, namely Star Trek Online and Countdown, the point of origin is named as the Hobus system, but for the course of this video I'll just call it the Romulan star, as really it makes little difference. The book also never identifies the starship Verity with the USS affix, let alone as an Odyssey class, although this is how it's portrayed in the comics. Again, there is a variation of the class present in Star Trek Online, but neither of these have appeared on screen. Supposedly, these prequel sources are to be considered canonical content. However, we have been told certain materials in the past were canon that were later contradicted, so take that as you will, but I've been burned before. So, to give us some background knowledge to this book, the Dominion War ended in 2375, leaving the United Federation of Planets in a rather poor state and seeking to rebuild its forces and lives. The Klingons, however, remained allied to the Federation, but were likewise severely hurt by the conflicts. The Romulans, for the most part, retreated back beyond the neutral zone to likewise rebuild their forces, and the Federation began to re-establish the former neutral zone treaties and embargoes now that the war was done. This status quo was seen in Star Trek Nemesis. The Enterprise, NCC 1701E, had been kept out of the Dominion War for the most part, engaged in diplomatic missions to remain true to the core of the Federation's mandate, much as the original Enterprise had been assigned during Pike's era of the Klingon conflicts. In the aftermath of the war, however, Cardassia Prime was decimated by the Dominion, and Starfleet offered to assist in rebuilding them, as it had with the Bajorans, who were finally admitted to the Federation. Cardassian relief lightly taxes the Federation's resources, but it sees great success in stabilising the Alpha Quadrant power. In 2379, the new Romulan praetor, Shinzon, a supposed Reman and hero of the Dominion War among the Remans, overthrew the Senate and extended an invitation to dialogue with the Federation. This was covered in the film Star Trek Nemesis, which culminated in the reveal of Shinzon's hoax and the death of Lieutenant Commander Data. Captain Picard continues to remain in command of the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701E, with Commander Worf stepping into the role as executive officer following Data's death and Captain Will Riker's reassignment to the USS Titan. Here he remained until 2381, when he received a call from Starfleet Command concerning a classified briefing he was to attend back at San Francisco Earth, Starfleet's HQ. In a meeting presided over by the Federation President, Starfleet Commander-in-Chief Fleet Admiral Bordson, and Captains Clancy and Picard, Lieutenant Commander Raffi Musica of Starfleet Intelligence's Romulan Affairs Department presented them with intercepted communications about a supernova which will destroy dozens of inhabited systems. Captain Picard immediately calls for Federation intervention to help the Romulans evacuate, while Captain Clancy argues that the Romulans are probably going to take care of it themselves. The issue stems from the fact that Picard wishes to commit as much as possible to the evacuation, saying that with 90 million lives on the line, they cannot afford to take half measures. Picard's impassioned speech wins over the CNC, who promoted Picard to Admiral and gives him command of the evacuation efforts. He has just under 6 years to manage his task. Not just evacuate Romulan planets, but also help create an infrastructure to support the refugees. Meanwhile, command of the Enterprise E is transferred to Worf, who is promoted to captain. However, the vessel will not take part in the operations, as it and its namesakes have too much history with the Romulan Star Empire. They also hope that seeing a Klingon, former enemies of the Federation, in command of the flagship will help placate the Romulans. Commander Geordie LaForge requests a transfer to Utopia Planitia to manage the production of evacuation vessels. After a week of negotiating, Captain Clancy has secured passage into Romulan space for Admiral Picard, beginning with the Tavasis 4, Ectis 2 and Insitor 5 colonies to evacuate. Picard recruits Lieutenant Commander Raffi Musica for her candid manner and specialist Romulan knowledge as his XO, and is assigned the new USS Verity NCC 97000. Meanwhile, on Utopia Planitia, several Starfleet vessels are refit to expand their crew capacity as a first step in producing new vessels. This includes the Wallenberg-class USS Nightingale and the USS Dignity, which were both former colony ships. However, LaForge encounters pushback from the shipyard personnel who are being forced to abandon personal projects and other construction work to focus on helping the Romulans. Some engineers resign in protest, but most are on board. Even with all hands on deck, however, LaForge realises that there aren't enough personnel to create the critical, unreplicatable and delicate components needed in some ship systems. On top of this, Romulus's position on Starfleet's assistance is inconsistent, and some are worried that the Federation will take advantage of the status to cripple the Star Empire. After 2 weeks into the project, Commander Estella Mackenzie, the foremost bioneural gel pack expert, suggests the use of bioneural circuitry to create an android workforce of non-sentient synthetics in order to speed up production. Around this time, Agnes Girardi meets Bruce Maddox at the Daystrom Institute, who is soon approached by LaForge to begin work on the synth workforce. Maddox objects, as the synths project is not true sentience, and he wishes to continue to pursue Dr. Noonien Soong's work on positronic brains, despite his lack of a breakthrough in this field. Eventually, Maddox acquiesces. The Cambridge Institute of Astronomy observes that the supernova will be larger than expected, and there is seemingly no natural cause. This information is relayed to Admiral Picard on the Verity, who notes former marked safe zones are no longer viable relocation sites. It is also noted, however, that several Federation colony worlds are. When the rescue fleet arrives at the first safe zones of Arnath, a Romulan set-up colony world, Picard finds the accommodations the Romulan Empire has prepared to be unacceptable, and Arnath a barren, lifeless world. Despite pressure from the Federation and Admiral Picard in person to the Romulan government, the Romulans demand that the USS Verity deposits its Romulan refugees and continue to stick to its agreed-upon parameters. Adhering to the Prime Directive, Picard is forced to resettle its refugees against their will to the harsh planet below, and this eats away at his conscience for the remaining year his fleet spends evacuating other worlds. Some in his fleet suspect that the Romulan Senate is using the crisis to do some unethical housekeeping, and there is a political element deciding who gets to live where. By 2382, Maddox has constructed the Daystrom A500 model synthetic. Although exactly what was needed and a technical marvel, they were little more than low-grade simulated intelligences in a humanoid shell. They would be capable of manufacturing the complex starship components, but nothing much else. Maddox regarded them with a mixture of revulsion and resignation, calling them little more than toys, and sincerely wished to return to his positronic research and pursuit of true artificial life. Despite his misgivings, the A500s would be ready to begin production within the month. Soon Utopia Planitia goes into full manufacturing mode within the next year, and with the increase in turnover, LaForge is able to assemble the new ships in record time. Over the year, Utopia Planitia churns out many ships, aiming to have constructed 2,000 by the end of 2383, and they are on track. This endeavour sees breakthroughs in ship production, but for the most part it's eating many of the Federation's resources and suspended a lot of other projects as they work against the clock. The Federation is also unwilling to pull its remaining ships back from active duty for evacuation missions that would take many months of transport. And they are also limited by the amount of heavily armed Federation ships the Romulans will allow into their space. On top of this, there have been concerns raised that Starfleet wants to avoid coming off too aggressive by charging in, and the Romulans are still not being consistently cooperative. Meanwhile, the Federation colony world of Terrassa reaches out to Admiral Picard and offers itself as willing to accept Romulan refugees. Picard, still concerned with the intermittent level of care provided by the Romulan Star Empire, agrees to relocate some civilians across the neutral zone without asking the Federation for permission, ordering the USS Dignity to cross into Federation space with its Romulan evacuees. This has immediate ramifications and begins to stir up the colony worlds closest to the neutral zone, who begin to speculate if they'll be asked to volunteer their own worlds. Others in Starfleet, Captain Clancy amongst them, point out that there are likely Tau Shiar among the evacuees, and Admiral Borson protects Picard's decision to angry Federation councillors and Romulan diplomats alike. With this action that would indeed save lives in the long run, Picard unintentionally begins to create cracks in the goodwill he had amassed in the rescue effort. So, that's part 1 of the current canon Star Trek timeline. Like I said, supposedly the prequel materials are to be considered accurate, and so far have lined up with this show, and even if not, I thought The Last Best Hope was a good read. It begins with the quote from Peak Performance, where Picard says to Data, "It is possible to commit no mistakes and still lose." Although throughout this book we see everything the Federation tried within reason to assist the Romulans, and how problem after problem gradually sapped morale for Picard's rescue initiative. We also see how the Romulan paranoia and secrecy downplayed the severity of the situation in fear of losing control, and how they continued to vilify Starfleet even as Picard tried to help. From a character standpoint, we get to spend a decent amount of time with LaForge, Maddox and other characters, with early discussions with the TNG crew too. Raffi surprises as we witness her as a Starfleet officer, before her job took her away from her family and she lost herself in conspiracy, and it's a refreshing change to see her more upbeat. Funnily enough, I think those that dislike Star Trek Picard's focus of Starfleet's darker, sterner side would find this book a refreshing change, or at least some much needed context. But then if you've already been put off Picard by this, then you have no reason to read this book. For people who enjoy focusing on the Trek universe as a larger whole, there is a lot to chew on, and I'll continue my review in part 2. Anyway, I'll conclude this video in its next part from 2383 to 2387, when the Romulan star, sun, Hobus, whatever, explodes and takes with it many Romulan lives. So until that video, thank you for watching this timeline, and until part 2 or any video in between, I've been Rick and I'll see you later. Thanks and goodbye.